Hi, this is Ted Price from Insomniac Games. On today's episode, I had the chance to talk to my great friend and neighbor, Vins Zampellae. Vince is the former CEO and founder of Infinity Ward and current CEO and founder of Respawn. We cover a wide range of topics from what it takes to start multiple successful companies, to growing to multiple teams, to making tough design calls in AAA game development. Please join me for a fantastic conversation with Vince. Hey, Vince.
Hey,
thanks for coming over.
Hey, my pleasure.
And so you and I have known each other for a long time in this industry. In fact, we actually live in the same neighborhood.
That's true.
And it's weird how small this industry is, not just in terms of how often we see each other at events, but just how many connections there are.
Yeah, that's true. You live across the street and I see you at events and never in the neighborhood or so.
Must have something to do with what we're doing all day, all the time.
Yeah, I think so. I think we're all pretty busy, right?
Yeah. Well, it's an all-consuming industry. And so you've been in the industry for, was it 25, 30 years now?
Is it really?
It must be. Because when did you start Infinity Ward?
Well, I think I got into the industry in the probably early 90s.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Definitely 25 plus years.
Wow. And then Infinity Ward was probably 2002.
Okay. And what inspired you to start Infinity Ward?
Well, at that point, we were at a company called 2015, and we made Medal of Honor Allied Assault. And the team, which, a lot of us still work together, the core team was just great, and we didn't like the conditions we were kind of working under. So we all decided to leave, said, hey, why don't we leave together? Because we're a decent group, right? So we decided to strike out together from 2015 and form Infinity Ward.
And when you did you have a specific game in mind that you wanted to make?
Well, we actually were originally contracted by EA to do a sequel and an expansion pack to Medal of Honor Allied Assault.
Okay. Got it.
So that's how the company kind of founded itself.
What were some of the things that you wanted to do differently in terms of the World War II shooters? What did you guys talk about in terms of changing the genre way back then?
I think at that point, it wasn't about changing as much as, setting up the new company, getting kind of everything running and doing something that was a sequel. So it was keeping things, like taking it one step and not like redefining everything.
And for you, starting up a brand new company, were you wearing a lot of different hats in terms of running things, but also making the game?
Yeah, I mean, that's when, at that point, we were, 20 people, maybe 22. So it's a little bit of, whatever needs to be done. You work on the design, you work on some art stuff, you work on audio stuff, you work on, movies, you work on taking out the trash. It's, it's a small group, everyone firing on all cylinders and kind of getting whatever needs to be done.
So what was your particular passion? What did you like most about production?
It's a lot of problem solving, right? It's not something that's the same every day. Like the job isn't go to work, stamp widgets. It's go to work, see what's on fire, put it out, figure out new ways to kind of push people to innovate, to do new things, to do things we haven't done before. So that's the kind of the beauty of the job for me.
But even way back then, right? When you're coming off of being in production and now running a company, but also helping with making the game, were you doing any of the art or helping with the designs, the level designs or any of that? Or was it mostly just helping people focus on the right things?
It was a lot of help with stuff. I mean, there's some of my art in Allied Assault.
So that's awesome.
It's terrible, but it was just, a need for things to be done. And then working with the designers, coming up with, kind of the holistic view of what the game is and figuring out where levels going to go. And so it's a little bit of everything.
So, and back then, what I recall, and you can correct me if I'm off on this, most first-person shooters were fairly linear. And this was getting from point A to point B, and then sort of putting all those levels together in a linear story. When you guys were talking about the first game, did you start with the story, or did you start with sort of the macro layout?
It was less of a cohesive story and more of a kind of set piece moments. So it's, take these key moments in World War II and how do you string them together into something that feels kind of good for players.
Makes sense. And what led you to Call of Duty?
Well, so we were doing the sequel to Allied Assault and the expansion pack. EA, once Allied Assault got really popular, they wanted to bring us in and make us part of EA. We had just kind of formed our own company. We didn't really want to do that, so we had a difference in vision.
Okay.
We'll call it. And that ended up to us parting ways. And we went and worked with Activision on Call of Duty, and that was kind of done to, it's kind of a spiritual successor, right?
Yeah.
In a way. So we kind of did it to crush Medal of Honor. I hate to say that. It sounds terrible because it makes me feel bad because I love Medal of Honor.
Well, there definitely was a huge rivalry back then. I remember that. And you guys were going head to head. And Call of Duty, at least by my recollection, came out on top, big time.
Oh, big time, yeah.
And what do you think the magic ingredients were that helped elevate it?
It's a good question. I mean, I think for us going forward, we were a cohesive team that had done it before. They were trying to now do it with a group that was, playing catch up. So, we naturally had the advantage.
Were there certain things that you decided to focus on in Call of Duty that hadn't been done before in World War II shooters?
Not really. I mean, I think it's about that kind of cinematic moments that we started in Allied Assault and kind of grew to be bigger into Call of Duty. So it's about big set piece moments where the world feels alive. There's a war happening around you. It's not just, you're not the one man killing machine that, can take on the entire Nazi army. It's about a squad, a group, kind of bringing that emotion into it. That's
what I remember. I remember those moments when you're storming these impossible enemy fortifications, right? They're huge. Lots of guys are firing at you, but you're with your team. And there were those cinematic moments that I didn't remember having seen in any other first person shooters.
Yeah, I think they started in Allied Assault.
Okay.
So it kind of came from there.
But you guys refined them to the point where it felt believable.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, well, I say that because we at Insomniac were looking at what you guys were doing. And at the time we were working either early on or in the middle of Resistance. And we were looking at all of the other first person shooters out there and asking ourselves, who's doing it right? Who's creating this sense of immersion and this sense of believability? Like you feel like you're there, and you guys were doing it consistently.
Yeah, well, that's what we were going for. So I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah. Well, it kept on, what I recall, because this all is sort of ancient history for us, but it kept growing. The mythos behind Call of Duty kept increasing, and you guys were adding more and more refinements to the formula. So at some point you shifted off of World War II.
That's right.
And what led to that decision?
Well, at that point we did Allied Assault, Call of Duty 2, all World War II games. We had done, 3 World War II games in a row. So it was kind of a need to grow ourselves and the brand into something new and unique. And it was contested. Activision didn't want it. Activision did not want Modern Warfare. They wanted another sequel in World War II because it was safer, I guess, right? So we just pushed and said, this is where we want to take it and, kind of expand what we can do, because there's, different theaters of war, different weapons, vehicles, things that you can kind of take on to a new level. So
how did it go internally? Did you have debate inside of Infinity Ward about whether we should make this move or not?
I think early on, because it is you're taking something that's successful and, like you said, constantly growing and thinking about reimagining it. So it's a little scary, but it was pretty easy to kind of make the switch.
Was there a point where you guys felt you had played out World War II, or you were just running out of material, or was there an infinite amount of material to choose from?
Yeah, I don't think I would say we played it out. I think we played it out for ourselves in doing, 3 games in a row. That's, 6+ years of development on one setting. So we wanted to do something different ourselves to grow, as a team.
How did you approach the brainstorming process when you shifted gears to Modern Warfare?
We do a lot of we had a lot of great designers, right? They're allowed to pitch ideas, come up with different settings, things they can do, throw some ideas together, and then we kind of see where they work in the bigger kind of game.
Do you grab everybody at once and say get into a group setting and start throwing things out there, or do you have more concentrated, smaller groups coming up with ideas?
I wish I could say it was like a really refined process that we have down to a science. It's really more chaotic than that. It depends on what we're doing.
Yeah.
I think at that point it was more probably smaller groups coming up with ideas.
Okay. Did you have a creative director or somebody who was in charge of pulling all those ideas together?
Yeah, we had at that point when we went to Modern Warfare, it was Jason West who was kind of leading the charge on what that game would be.
Got it. Well, the reason I ask about brainstorming is because this is one of those, I think, industry-wide challenges where there's no right way to do it.
Right.
And I think it's really nice to hear people sharing their perspective on what works and what doesn't for different projects, different studios.
Yeah, I think it depends on the team. It depends on the subject matter. Like with Titanfall, we did, for Titanfall 2, we did a thing called action blocks, which I think one of the designers actually did a talk at GDC on that you can look at.
Okay.
But that went really well because everyone kind of came up with these different ideas for gameplay. And they did little snippets of here's what it would look like. And then we kind of watched and looked through them all. And, you know, some would be amazing and some would be, okay, that's not going to work in a game.
So the designer would prototype actual gameplay and you'd watch it on screen?
Correct.
Or play it? How much time did you give designers to do that?
I think it was about 3 months.
Okay.
Maybe slightly more.
And did you say to each designer who was interested, okay, you have 3 months to prototype an idea and then at the end of the 3 months you show it, or were you seeing things along the way?
They were showing things along the way.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you keep something like that on track?
You don't apparently.
Okay.
So, yeah, we went kind of long in the design process on Titanfall 2, kind of to get to a point where we kind of locked things in. So we ended up, you know, the downstream kind of components of the game, like, you know, environmental art and audio kind of got a little crunched at the end because we went a little too long.
Well, were you presenting visually refined concepts as well as the design prototypes?
No.
But everybody was just kind of throwing their stuff in just to make it functional? Was that the way it was working?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, the artists would be working on things, but it's not the refined process of, you know, like what does it take to get a level to completion? And there's a lot of, you know, the environmental artists at the end kind of go in and really bring things to life.
That makes sense. And so was your goal at the end of the 3 months to come up with the key features, new features for Titanfall 2?
Yes, it was to kind of lock in what the gameplay moments, what the gameplay pieces would look like throughout the levels. And
so related to that, given that you had such a strong foundation for gameplay on Titanfall 1, what did you talk about the balance of old to new on when you were going into designing Titanfall 2?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little different because Titanfall 1 was a multiplayer only game.
Mm-hmm.
So we kind of put those story moments in the multiplayer, and, you know, for some people it resonated, for other people, you know, they ran by it at 100 miles an hour and didn't even notice it.
Yeah.
So we kind of made the decision to make a single player. So that's kind of where the new ideas came into. Like the multiplayer, we kind of had an idea of what that was going to be,
sure,
right? So it's taking what does a single player now in a Titanfall universe mean, and kind of figuring out what gameplay elements, and that's where the things like cause and effect came from, where you blink between time.
Yeah. Did you get fan feedback on what fans might want, even though you hadn't announced that you were going to do focus on single player? Were they giving you feedback on just general mechanics and then your pilot mechanics?
I mean, we got a lot of feedback. That always plays into it when you think about it. I don't know that we used like anything directly. You know, we changed a few things. We kind of tried to make the game a little more deliberate, where it's not like one of the criticisms we got is that it's always at 11. You know, you play through, for an hour and you kind of set the controller down and you're like still shaking. So we kind of tried to even that out a little bit and make the gameplay a little more tolerable at times.
It's funny you say that, though. Is that a bad thing? I mean, whenever I walked away from a Titanfall match, I did feel that adrenaline buzz. It felt like, wow, that was an over the top, incredible experience. And sure, I need a break, but I would like to go back and do it again.
Well, I think that's the thing, though. We drove people to want to take a break from the game, and that's kind of opposite of what you're going for, right? You want people to be as engaged as possible for as long as possible, especially in multiplayer.
Yeah.
So I think we did the game that was a break between the bigger games like the Battlefields or Call of Duties. And, so people would come and take a break, try it out, and they'd maybe come back a month later, but it wasn't as consistent a game as we would have liked.
Okay, makes sense. Well, going back to Titanfall 1, what was the brainstorming process like there? Where did the genesis of the idea occur?
Well, that's a whole kind of mess, because at that point we were in a lawsuit with Activision. So actually 42 of the people at our company were in a lawsuit with Activision. So it was, we were doing that, trying to start the company, coming up with what tech we were going to use, coming up with ideas for games. And we pitched a bunch of different ideas. Everyone got to throw some ideas around. One of the artists, Joel Emsley, did the Titans, did some like mock-ups of them. He did some maquettes, and people just kind of fell in love with it, and kind of that pushed us to the Titanfall idea.
At what point did the playable pilots come into play?
They were always there.
Okay. Because it was that, I remember seeing the first trailer you put out, and I think you showed some wall running. You showed the pilots getting out of the mech and actually doing some stuff that I would never expect from a mech game. I probably shouldn't even call it a mech game, but
yeah, we don't like to call it a mech game.
Sorry.
I mean, it has, but
from a game
it's
with
great.
mechs.
It's fine. But it's not a mech only game, right?
Right.
It's a game. It's a pilot and Titan game.
Yeah. Well, was there any debate about whether pilots should be in the game, or was that always just an accepted mechanic from the beginning?
Tons of debate, because you're basically making two games. You have to have gameplay areas where wall running and small kind of pilot gameplay works, and you have to have areas where giant Titan gameplay works, and they have to mesh together very well. So it's really kind of harder to make something compelling.
So when you were talking about that, were people bringing up scope as an issue? I mean, making two games at once, right? That's a massive task.
Right.
What were some of the arguments for and against?
Well, we initially didn't conceive it as just a multiplayer only game. We were kind of looking at it as single player too. Looking at the team that we had, we were a fairly small team at that time, new company. We decided to not work on single player because, we didn't have the resources. There's a lot of problems in, with the wall running and stuff. How do you constrain, where the movement goes? And so made the decision to do multiplayer only. And then that kind of stopped the debate on, when, if it should be pilot or pilot and Titan. I think that was, little bits of tension, not like big movements.
Was that a gradual thing, or did you at one point just announce to the team, okay, guys, multiplayer only?
We talked about it before making the decision for probably a couple of months.
Okay.
So it took some time to kind of sort it out in everyone's head, right? Of like, are we really going to try that? Is it something, worth doing?
How did you approach buy-in on this? Did you talk to the whole team and say, are you in, are you out? Or is that something that you guys do as part of your culture?
Yeah, we do. We talk to kind of the leads first. So kind of get the lead groups together. They represent their kind of core groups, and walk to them all through the decision-making process of like, here's some things we're considering and here's why. And then let everybody kind of give feedback on what they thought of it. And at first, everyone was like, what? That's crazy.
Did you talk about the multiplayer backend much in terms of what the kind of support you would have to build to have a multiplayer only game that was setting a new bar? I only bring this up because we've gone through this before too. And the specter of multiplayer is often a scary one, because if you're not a multiplayer only company having released several multiplayer games, there's so much beneath the surface that is easy to ignore and not plan for, at least in Insomniac's experience. So I just kind of was wondering what it was like for you guys.
I think we always assumed we'd make a multiplayer game.
Okay.
So it was kind of like just from the beginning, a foregone conclusion.
Yeah. Well, you had a lot of experience doing that. I mean, that's something that you guys built your companies on. So
yeah.
Okay. So what is the decision-making culture like at Respawn today? How do you guys go about making big calls?
Well, we have 3 teams now. So we have the VR game, we have Star Wars, and we have Titanfall. So each team is a little different, right? We have a game director, though, that's in charge of each game.
Okay.
And generally, everything flows up to them, and they interact with their teams. Depends on how big the decision is. If it's just, level-based things, kind of within the control of the scope of the game, that's mostly just falls on the game designer or the game director.
Okay.
And then if it's bigger than that, something that they want to change that's, radically different, then, we'll kind of all get together and talk.
Do you have shared departments where you have, for example, audio working on multiple projects, or do you have unique groups for each game?
We generally have unique groups for each game.
Wow. Okay. That's impressive. That's a lot of moving parts.
Yes.
And how do those groups share information? Again, this sounds like dry stuff, but I bring this up because, again, we find that communication between different groups is sort of can make or break a project. If it's going well, it's great. As soon as it starts going off the rails, everything suffers.
Yeah, I mean, I think different groups communicate better. Like the audio guys generally talk all the time, and there's a lot of collaboration. Maybe not so much on the design side. Art, maybe a little bit.
Do you have any tricks that you guys use? Any procedures that you've built or homegrown that you feel work really well for Respawn?
Not really. We try to get together like the group of all leads every once in a while, probably not more than once every 3 months, but just to kind of go over like what are things that you're seeing, just company culture, development process, just to kind of get a feel for what's happening in different teams. And then we'll get together with just the game directors, like probably about that frequency as well.
Okay.
I say about because it kind of, the intention is there, but it doesn't always work out with timing to do it. So we've been a little lax on it lately.
Sure. Well, I
so
mean,
now
when
that we were talking, I'm going to go back and make sure that happens.
Okay. Well, I mean, I think just personally, there can never be enough communication. And I mean, over communicating, it can be annoying for sure. I know it is. I over communicate sometimes and it annoys the heck out of people, but I prefer to do that than have people say, I never heard about that, or you didn't tell me, or, fill in the blanks.
And we've had that before where people have been surprised by things and you're like, yeah, okay, maybe should have,
it's hard though, right?
That a little more widely.
When you're in production, right? Especially if there's one team in production, one team in pre-production, another team releasing a game, then everybody's got different pressures and it's easy to forget about the need. So
we've had some people go, like, as one of the reasons to grow to multiple teams is to give people opportunities to kind of learn new skills and to kind of advance in their career, right? So we've had some cross-pollination of people, so that's good. That helps kind of keep the teams talking.
That makes sense. So speaking of that, did you go from 1 to 3 teams?
We went from 1 to 2 to 3.
Okay. How fast was that transition?
That's a good question. We started the second team probably 2+ years before starting the third.
Okay.
So we've been working for a while on what the second game would be. We came up with before signing up to do the Star Wars game, we had a prototype for something else that we were pitching and ended up shelving that for the Star Wars opportunity. Nerd bucket list, kind of stuff.
Sure. So what are some things that went right and didn't go right when you were starting up, say, your second team?
I would say we grew slowly, which is good. Mm-hmm. Kind of work on the idea. Because one of the things when we started Respawn, we had a lot of people on day one because there was a bunch of people that left Infinity Ward and came to Respawn like right away. So you have, almost a full team of people, no game, no tech, no idea of what you're going to do. Yeah. So there's a lot of people just clamoring for what am I going to be working on today? Doing that differently, intentionally with the second team to kind of grow slowly, figure out what the game is, get the kind of core group together, worked out really well, I think.
Okay. So you had was that a specifically designed pre-production phase for the game where you were ramping people into it? Is that what you're describing?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
How big was that, if you don't mind me asking, how big was the team that started the idea?
Well, I mean, it started with, like we hired Stig and he brought people on. So it started with one and then gradually grew. When we pitched the prototype to publishers, it was probably 15 people.
Okay. And was it a playable prototype?
It was.
Wow. Do you find that that's the way today to make it work when you're out there trying to get people to support your game?
I don't think there is a way. I think it's, it's so idea and kind of people dependent that you have to be a little flexible.
Okay. Well, that's a great answer. It's been my experience too. I mean, there are very few developers now, I think, pitching big AAA games to publishers. So yeah, we all have our own approach.
It's mostly you.
Not just Insomniac. There are a few others too, I think. But let's talk about it. Let's talk about AAA games. It's pretty interesting how this space continues to just motor on. And I don't know if you recall, I feel like it was a few years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, that there was some question about how long AAA games could exist because of the costs and because of the incredibly high break evens. But AAA games continue to do really well, at least a set of AAA games.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I think it's not as many probably as there was 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
So is it these big kind of breakout games that are only going to exist in the future?
Well, what do you think?
I hope not, but it kind of seems like it's trending that way, right? Like, if I look at the games that my kids play, like, it's the League of Legends or Warframes or, things that are free to play and live for years and years. And that's what, the way people are engaging with games now. And, there's something great about that too. But, I also like the big story games. But then you see something like, Grand Theft Auto that sells, endless numbers of units. It's, that's great too. So
there's maybe room for both. I mean, because the free-to-play games, and Warframe's a great example of that, of a game that started small but just grew. And it's not something that we talk about much in the game space, but man, they've been killing it for a long, long time.
Yep.
How challenging do you think it is to break into that space, which is the sort of the free-to-play AAA space?
Right. That's a good question.
Is that something that you would ever consider doing, going head to head with one of the big AAA? I'll call it AAA, but it's the production values are there, the scope is there. AAA free to play games.
Well, I think we have to look at that, right? As our industry is kind of growing and changing, and people are engaging, new generations of gamers coming in. They want different content than what we've been providing, so we have to be open to looking at that.
What do you think, again, and this is an impossible question to answer, but I'm going to ask it anyway. So looking ahead to 5 years from now, do you think things are going to change in terms of what gamers want? And let's keep it focused on console gamers.
Possibly. I mean, with the streaming technology kind of becoming a reality, maybe in that time frame, right? And subscription services now being offered, and where do they go? So there's a potential for the way we deliver content to radically change.
How would that affect a studio like yours or like Insomniac's or any more traditional studio? What would you have to do? How would you think differently about production?
I think if you had, let's say, subscription service, you still want those tentpole games that drive people to want to be part of the service. So I think, we'd always want to deliver AAA games. We still want, like, that's our drive. We still want to do some of that.
Yep.
I think it opens up a room or a place for smaller things, to exist, where if they're just part of a subscription or a network, now it's okay that that's a couple hour experience. So I think the good thing that I see in that is it allows more creative things to exist without having to be these, endless 100-hour experiences or something that's so encompassing that it's worth your money.
Do you think this is, again, maybe a hard question to answer because I have trouble answering it. Do you think it's possible to create a smaller budget or medium budget size free-to-play game with AAA production values? And I ask this, and I'll give you some background, because building those systems and gameplay mechanics that feel like they belong in a $60 console or PC game, but doing it for less, taking it all the way to finish, but for less is something that's hard for us older developers to wrap our heads around sometimes.
I don't know. I think when you see games kind of that evolve over time, I think maybe that's the way to approach it. Like you release something that's a little smaller, and if it takes hold, then you kind of finish it.
So you can, and again, I'm maybe misinterpreting what you're saying. Releasing with mechanics that may not be refined yet, right? Let's say it's a combat mechanic that works, kind of fun, well, certainly games have done that, right? And there's something that brings players in besides the fact that the game is free that hooks them.
Right.
Right. And that's, I bring this up because I think a lot of us in this side of the industry struggle with that concept, but it does work, and games have proved that it can work, but it's a scary cliff to step off of.
Yeah. Really scary. I think I was talking more content. So
okay.
I think in terms of mechanics, I think it's hard to imagine releasing something that you don't think is fun and refined enough yet.
Well, let's jump to that then. Are there points in your development where you have those gameplay light bulb moments where things just have been not working and not fun, and then all of a sudden some switch is flipped and the game achieves its magic?
Yeah, I think that happens a lot, right? New things that you're trying, the way like wall running or something like that. Like the first iteration of it was not fun at all.
Yeah. What changed about it that all of a sudden made it great?
It's a refinement to it just being, I want to say easier, but it's just easier to engage, easier to use, not necessarily like easier in how it functions. So there's still a skill level to it, but the engaging it, making it work doesn't feel clunky. It doesn't feel heavy. It's just almost natural motion of, okay, now I can do this.
Were there times where people were fighting to rip it out of the game because it just didn't work, and there were some supporters who said, no, let's wait. We're almost there.
Yes.
And how do you deal with that?
Oh, I think that's where you make the calls, see how much time you have left. And there are things that do get ripped out of the game because they just never make it to a point where they're fun, or we don't have the time for the game.
Well, so those decisions are the nightmarish ones, right? Where you're struggling constantly as a person who's running the project and saying, should I give it another month? Can I give it another month? How do you do that? Is there are there things that you've done in the past that have been where you can provide advice for those who are going through those struggles now?
I mean, I think it's about looking at what you're working on, deciding how much iteration has kind of gone into it already and how much improvement has there been, and what are you sacrificing to keep working on it? Because ultimately, you have a limited amount of time.
Right.
So are there other features that are going to get pushed off the end of the schedule because you're going to spend more time on something that may or may not make it? And then you just make a logical decision based on that. Yeah.
And at what point then do you, well, let me back up for a second. So that I think comes back to quality. You're the ultimate arbiter of quality, right? Or the game director who's running the project.
Now, yeah.
How does a game director at Respawn say, this is not good enough? It needs to be better. I know we're running out of time, but you got to fix it. What's the approach that works?
I think it's just, like you said, it's that passionate plea of like, this is important to the game. We need to work on it. We need to get something fun. And then it either works or it doesn't.
Are there some things that you like to avoid when having to give that kind of feedback? And I ask because, again, when it comes to development, those are the moments where a team could become passionate about solving a problem or check out.
Right.
And it's a fine line.
Yeah, I think it's about remembering that every one of those features that somebody's put months of their time into, there's emotion there. Like it's something that they feel really strongly about because they've put a lot of themselves into it. So you have to treat it respectfully, even if it's something that ultimately isn't going to make it into the game. You still have to realize that it's somebody's baby.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yeah,
but I think that's great perspective. And it is easy to forget that if you're a game director or somebody in charge of making those decisions all the time. What other things do you guys do as a team that helps foster a cohesive, collaborative culture at Respawn?
We try to do parties, kind of, get everyone together, like Friday nights, have some food and drinks and all hang out. And, you know, as we've grown, it's gotten harder. You know, we're over 300 people now at the studio.
That's
so
incredible.
It gets tougher to do those kind of things. We do a weekly all hands meeting where everybody gets together and we kind of talk about the company. We kind of talk about what's going on in like HR, new people that are hired, kind of get up and introduce themselves. All the game directors talk about what's going on in their game. So it just kind of keeps people a little more connected.
Wow. Every week for 300 people?
Yep.
That's impressive. Do you have a space that fits 300 people?
Barely.
Okay. That's really cool. Are there things that you like doing personally with the team?
I mean, I think I would say I like to engage with people, like, you know, get up and talk to the, you know, especially like the game directors or the project lead or the, you know, different leads. It's been so busy the last probably year that I have not been doing that as much as I would like. So, but I think that makes, to me, a big difference for me feeling kind of more connected to what's going on.
Yeah. It's hard with 300 people.
It's hard. Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's a lot of people to talk to and stay in touch with. But 300, I imagine, I mean, because we're in the same situation, it's doable, right? I think when you get, I'm imagining when one gets to 500 or something even bigger, it's really challenging.
Yeah, well, we had the, you know, with the sale of the company kind of happening end of last year, almost a year ago now. So that kind of threw things a little off, right? Of like, now we're integrating and kind of making sure everything stays as similar as it can be.
What was that like? I mean, was that a surprise to people, or had you been working so closely with EA that it was sort of an expected thing?
I think both. You know, we have been involved with EA since the beginning of the company. Like EA funded us to kind of get started. So to a lot of people, it wasn't a shock. But at the same time, you know, there were some people, not everyone knew it was happening. Yeah. So I think some people were surprised that we weren't, you know, some people want that independent small studio, and it's like, well, we're not really small anymore. So, but I get the vibe, right?
What are the pros and cons, you think? Because you've been independent, you've been part of larger publisher organizations. When you look at both, how do you see them, the checklists sort of aligning?
I mean, I guess independent, you can kind of make your own decisions, but you're still, you know, you're working with the publisher, so there's a lot of give and take on that anyway. But you get a little more of that. You feel free, right? But then there's less security working with a big company, especially as our industry is kind of growing and shifting. We have a little more insight into what's happening and kind of, I think, more power to change with the industry. Okay.
I mean, by working more closely with a publisher, by being a part
right.
and seeing the inside workings.
Right. Yeah, we have a lot more information on what's happening now within EA and within other publishers.
That makes sense.
Because we're part of them. So.
Okay. Has it changed your culture at all?
Not really. I think we've kind of, you know, they bought us because we do something right, I hope. So we don't want to change that, like, and become just like anybody else. We want to be Respawn, just we're part of EA.
Yeah. So VR was a big part of that announcement too, wasn't it? You'd already been working in VR, right? But I remember when I saw the announcement about Respawn becoming part of EA, it was sort of re-amplified. So what are your thoughts on VR today?
I mean, we're in this industry because we like to be creative, do something new, do something exciting, solve new problems.
Yeah.
VR gives you all that, right?
Yeah.
The install base maybe isn't there yet. So, you know, that's the downside of it. But at the same time, there's like new things that you can do in a game that are just, you know, you couldn't do before. And the sense of scale and the movement, and it's fun.
I will commiserate. I will agree, because we also are in VR, and it is pretty astounding what you can build in VR that just isn't possible to experience in a traditional game.
So I love that, and that end of it is it's great.
Yeah. Where would you like VR to go? And I'm not talking about audience installed base. I'm talking about when you think about tech and the experience itself.
Well, I think once we get something that's, you know, reasonably priced, untethered, it becomes a different experience. You know, now everyone can use it kind of in a different way. You can walk around, you know, with it on. So I think that's the next logical spot for it, right?
Yeah. Does it open up new design opportunities for you and your team? The untethered aspect?
Probably.
I'm just personally thinking about the idea of walking around without having to worry about the cord that's attaching me to my PC. It makes a big difference. I will say I've tried out some untethered high-end experiences, and they're pretty darn cool. Really cool, actually.
Yeah, that'll be exciting.
So, and just as a sort of a parallel track, what do you think of AR? Do you have any thoughts on where that's going these days?
Not really. Honestly, I have not looked at much of that stuff. So it sounds great.
Yeah. Still early.
It's still early, yeah.
So as far as you personally, is this your career, you think, until you're dead and buried? That sounds morbid. Sorry. I should say. When you think about the next 10, week. 15, 20. Oh, man, I hope not.
No, me too. Yeah, I mean, I just can't really... The thought of doing something else seems odd to me because I've just been doing this so long. It's what I know. It's what I enjoy. I feel, lucky to be able to do something like this and get paid for it.
Yeah.
It's to me fantastic. I don't know what else I would do.
What did you think you would do before you got into video games?
I don't know that I had a clear enough idea.
Really?
Yeah.
What did you think your parents expected you to do before you got into video games?
Probably not this. But
really?
Yeah.
Did it take a while for your parents to accept the fact that you were in video games and successful? Or do they
not
support
necessarily.
you all along?
They supported me pretty well all along. I don't think they, they're not gamers. They never, had any of that. So I think to them it was a little bit of like, oh, you're working on that Nintendo? Like, well, kinda, not really. Sure. But yeah, I think they've always been really supportive.
And how do your kids feel about you in video games? Are you the cool dad because you always have the best consoles and or all the consoles and you can give them free games? It's
weird, right? Because I remember growing up, I had to like bust my ass to get a game. Like if I wanted to earn enough money to buy it. And now I come home and I have stacks of unopened games and kind of sitting on the counter, and it's like it takes away something from it, right? So I think you get a little bit of both. There's the, hey, it's cool, your dad works on games, and then you also get the, hey, I don't like the game your dad worked on. So
oh, really? Oh man.
So you get both sides of it. Imagine you run into that too.
Pretty much. I mean, for me, my kids mostly and their friends talk about Fortnite. I think that's the conversation that has not ended for the last 6 months. It just is constantly Fortnite. But I am gratified. I do get a sense of pride when they occasionally will take 10 minutes off of Fortnite and play one of our games. I think that's kind of cool. But it is fun. It's fun to, I think, bond with the kids over games, our kids. And this sounds probably a little unfair to other industries, but I think it is unique for all of us in the games industry to have that automatic bridge to our kids, because we're making something that they, I believe, automatically connect with versus say working in finance where maybe the kids don't quite get it yet when they're 12 or 15.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think just, knowing other people in the industry, we're able to provide benefits to the kids, right? Like they get games or free things in games or get to go to events. And, like my kids love League of Legends. We went to PAX and they got to go up on stage and throw like codes out to the crowd. And
really?
It's like, that's a great thing to be able to offer.
Nice. That's very cool. Well, going back to your stack of unopened games, this is something I struggle with all the time. How do you deal with that? What is your approach to actually staying up on what's relevant in games today?
I try to play as much as I can. It's not always easy because there are a lot of great games, right?
Yeah.
I did finish Spider-Man.
All right.
So
excellent.
And not even just because I was coming here. It was a great game, by the way.
Thanks.
Some interest me more than others, right? Just naturally, I gravitate towards different games. So those I'll probably put more time into.
Yeah.
But, I try to kind of stay up on everything, and I'll dedicate a certain amount of time every week to just playing something.
Do you guys discuss games at Respawn?
We do.
How do you look objectively at the competition and say, hey, they did something great and maybe we should learn from that? And by the way, I will say that Call of Duty, I mentioned before, was a huge influence on us for several reasons. First, the two weapon system that you guys had, the weapon switching, completely influenced a huge change that we made in Resistance 2.
Great.
It was massive, and we had debate after debate over that, but you guys did it so well, it became sort of a no-brainer for us. And the other thing was how you did training, how you do training in Call of Duty, and that was another thing we looked very carefully at. But anyway, getting back to the question, how do you guys debate and discuss what other games do and potentially bring those influences into your games?
It's something that when something big comes out, it just naturally takes over the conversation because we're all always talking about what we're doing, especially if it is something close to what we're working on.
Yeah.
Then it just naturally becomes part of the conversation and we all talk about it. We will occasionally kind of sit down, especially like with the game directors, and kind of sit down and talk about like new games that have come out, things that they're doing well. Like we have a purposeful meeting where we'll talk about things occasionally, but a lot of times it is just, we're all such gamers that it just is naturally there.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
That you can do that.
And it's good because you'll get certain people will pick out games that other people wouldn't. And they'll talk about a key element that I might have missed, in playing through a game because they see it slightly differently. So having that conversation to me is great.
I love hearing that. And I hope other people in the industry love hearing that, because while we're competitors, we're not really the kind of competitors that you see in other industries. It's definitely a very peer-based industry where we're always sharing and interested in discussing design and what was great about one game and great about another game, and how can we sort of stand on the shoulders of giants often and move the industry forward.
That's great.
So just sort of the last few questions, what do you think are the big ideas that can move our industry forward?
It's a big question.
It is. Sorry. Let me see. Let me see if I can refine it a little bit more. What are some things that we could do better as an industry?
I think we're starting to take story and emotion more seriously. To me, it's a form of entertainment, and entertainment is all about emotion, making people feel something. So I think realizing that and putting that kind of at the forefront of what we do, to me, is really important. That's great.
I agree.
And then, just user flows and different things like that, and making things more accessible. And, I think we've been gradually getting better and better at that as an industry. So I think the more of that we get, the better.
I agree. Yeah, it's been so nice to see more and more attention devoted to accessibility in our industry. Well, and finally, when all is said and done, what do you want to look back on as sort of your fondest learnings from this industry? What do you want to feel like you've taken from this industry to yours personally? And I'm not saying that you're going anywhere, but it's just fun to think ahead about these things.
I guess it's looking at making people, like, we make a lot of friends along the way, you included, right? And we talk about games and what propels us. And so it's about those relationships and making sure we treat each other and our fans respectfully, because ultimately we're all a big group who are in this because we love it, whether playing, making, just talking. It's a passion-driven industry.
Awesome. Well, thanks. And if people want to get in touch with you, how should they do that?
My email is vince@respawn.com.
Great.
Pretty easy. We don't make it really tricky to find us.
Got it. Thank you so much for discussing all of these topics and for being here today.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.